The Supernaturalist by Eoin Colfer. Chapter 1. Cosmonaut Hill. Satellite City, Northern Hemisphere. Soon. Satellite City, the city of future, proclaimed the billboards. A metropolis completely controlled by the Mishi-9 satellite, hovering overhead like a floating man of war. An entire city custom constructed for the third millennium. Everything the body wanted, and nothing the soul needed. 300 square miles of gray steel and automobiles. Take Cosmos Hill, for example. A nice enough boy who had never done anything wrong in his short existence. Unfortunately, this was not enough to guarantee him a happy life, because Cosmos Hill did not have a sponsor. And in Satellite City, if you didn't have a sponsor, and they couldn't trace your natural parents through public record DNA files, then you were sent to an orphanage until you reached adulthood. And by that time, you were either dead, or the orphanage had fabricated a criminal record for you so that you would be sold to one of the private labor prisons. 14 years before we take up the thread of this story, baby Cosmos was discovered swaddled in an insulated cherry pizza envelope on Cosmonaut Hill in Moscow town. The state police swabbed him for DNA, searched for a match in the satellite mainframe, and came up blank. Nothing unusual about that orphanage. Orphans turn up every day in the city. So the newly christened Cosmos Hill was dipped in a vaccine vat that sent on a tube to the Clarissa Frayne Institute for Parentally Challenged Boys, Fright Class. Satellite City was not part of any welfare state, so its institutions had to raise funds in any way they could. Clarissa Frayne's specialty was produce testing. Whenever a new modified food or untested pharmaceutical product was being developed, the orphanage volunteered its no sponsor charges as guinea pigs. It made perfect financial sense. The orphans got fed and cleaned, and the Frayne Institute got paid for the privileges. Cosmo received his schooling from an education software. His teeth were whiter than white, and his hair was lustrous and flake-free. But his insides felt like they were being scoured with a radioactive wire brush. Eventually, Cosmo realized that the orphanage was slowly killing him. It was time to get out. There were only 3 ways out of Clarissa Frayne's adoption, death, or escape. There was a 0 chance that he'd actually be adopted, not at his age. Truculent teenagers were not very popular with the childless middle class. For years, he had cherished the dream that someone would want him. Now, it was time to face facts. Death was much easier to achieve. All he had to do was keep an eye on doing what he was told, and his body would give up in a matter of years. The average life expectancy of an orphan was 15 years. Cosmo was 14. That left him with less than 12 months before the statistics and his time were up. 12 months to plan for the final option. There was only one way he could get out of Clarissa Frayne alive: escape. At the Clarissa Frayne Institution of Parentally Challenged Boys, every day was basically the same. Toil by day, fitful sleep by night. There were no off days, no juvenile rights. Every day was a work day. The marshals worked the orphans so hard that by 8 p.m., most of the boys were asleep standing up, dreaming of their beds. Cosmo Hill was the exception. He spent every moment of his life watching for that one chance. That split second when his freedom would beckon him from the outside and in an unlocked door and an unguarded fence. He must be ready to seize that moment and run with it. It wasn't likely that his chance would come on this particular day, and even if it did, Cosmos didn't think he would have the energy to run anywhere. The no sponsors had spent an afternoon testing the new series of antispirants. Their legs had been shaved and sectioned with rings of tape. The flesh between the bands was sprayed with five varieties of anti-spirit. And then the boys were set on treadmills and told to run. Sensors attached to their legs and monitored their sweat glands, determining which spray was most effective. By the end of the day, Cosmos had run 10 miles, and the pores on his legs were inflamed and scaled. He was almost glad to be cuffed to a moving partner and began the long walk back to the dormitory. Marshal Redwood ushered the boys into the dorm. Redwood resembled a wax gorilla with the exception of a red cowlick, which he toyed with constantly. "Now, boys," said Redwood, unlocking one pair of cuffs at a time, "there's a game on tonight that I'm very interested in seeing. As a matter of fact, I bet you a few diners on the outcome. So if you know what's good for you." Redwood didn't have to finish his threat. The boys knew that the marshal had 100 legal ways of making the no sponsors' lives miserable, and 1,000 legal ones. "Sleep well, young princes," said the marshal, grinning, keying his code into the dorm room. "Tomorrow, as usual, is a busy day, jam-packed full of fun." The no sponsors relaxed once Redwood had gone, and the silence of discipline was replaced by the groans. I apologize for that. Let's see. Cosmo touched his leg gingerly, where there's partially acidic spray had actually burned the skin. "Few minutes to light out," said Redwood's voice over a network of speakers. "Climb the ladders, boys." 300 orphans turned immediately to the dozen or so steel ladders and began climbing. Nobody wanted to be stranded on the dorm floor once the ladders were retracted. If the marshals caught a no sponsor on the ground after lights out, a 10-mile run would seem like a Sunday stroll compared to the punishment they would dish out. Each boy had an assigned space in the dorm where he ate, slept, and passed whatever leisure time the no sponsors had. These rooms were actually sections of cardboard utility pipe that had been sawed into 6-foot lengths. The pipes were suspended from a network of wires almost 50 feet off the ground. Once the pipes were occupied by orphans, the entire contraption swayed like ocean liner. Cosmo climbed quickly, ignoring the pain in his leg muscles. His pipe was near the top. If the lights went out before he reached it, he could be stranded on the ladder. Each step brought fresh stabs of pain into his tendons, but he climbed on, pressing against the boy ahead with his head, feeling the boy behind closing in. After a few minutes of feverish climbing, Cosmo reached his level, a narrow walkway, barely the width of his hand. Cosmo slid across carefully, gripping a rail on the other side of the walkway above him. His pipe was 4 columns across. Cosmo swung inside, landing on the foam rubber mattress. 10 seconds later, the lights went out. A sick yellow glow lit the interior of each pipe. Dinner. The meal had been thrown in earlier by a marshal in a cherry picker. The meal packs had been tested a few years previously by the no sponsors for use of soldiers in the fields. The trays and water bottles were luminous and also edible, which meant the orphans could eat after lights out, saving the management of a few diners. The tray was made from a rough, unleavened, crisp bread, and the water bottle from a semi-rigid gum. The army had discontinued the use of the meal packs following several lawsuits by soldiers, claiming that the luminous packs caused internal bleeding. The orphanage bought up the surplus and fed them to the orphans every single day. Cosmo ate slowly, not bothering to wonder what was in the meal. Wondering about it would only add more to his list. He had to believe that he would escape Clarissa Frayne before the meal pack could do him any lasting damage. Cosmo saved the water for last, using most of it to wash down the crisp bread tray. Then he turned the gum bottle inside out, laying it across his head like a face cloth. There must be a better life, he thought glumly. Somewhere, at this very moment, people were talking openly. Surely people were laughing. Real laughter, too. not just the spiteful kind that so often echoed around the orphanage halls. Cosmo lay back, feeling the gum bottle's moisture seeping onto his forehead. He didn't want to think tonight. He didn't want to play the parent game, but the sleep that he had yearned was proving elusive. His own parents. Who were they? Why had they abandoned him on that cosmonaut hill? Maybe he was Russian. It was impossible to tell from his features. Brown curly hair, brown eyes, light skin, freckled brown. He could be from anywhere. Why had they abandoned him? Cosmo transferred the gum bottle to a red strip on his leg. Shut up, he told his brain. Not tonight. No living in the past. Look to the future. Someone knocked gently from the pipe above. It was Ziploc Murphy. The network was opening up. Cosmo answered the knock with one of his own, then pulled back his mattress, signaling fence in the pipe up below. The no-sponsored had developed a system of communication that allowed them to converse without angering the marshals. Clarissa Frayne discouraged actual face-to-face communication between the boys, on the grounds that friendships might be developed, and friendships could lead to unity, maybe even revolt. Cosmo dug his nails into the seam of the cardboard pipe and pulled out two small tubes. Cosmo dug his nails into a seam in the cardboard pipe and pulled out two small tubes. Both had been fashioned from mashed gum bottles and crisp bread, then baked on a windowsill. Cosmo screwed one into a small hole in the lower surface of his pipe, and the other into a hole overhead. Ziploc's voice wafted through from above. Hey, Cosmo, how are your legs? Burning, grunted Cosmo. I put my gum bottle on one, but it's not helping. I tried that too, said Fence from below. Antispirants. This is nearly as bad as the time they had us testing for those creeper slugs. I was throwing up for weeks. Comments and suggestions snuck through the holes and from all the pipes and all over the pipe construct. The fact that all the pipes were all touching along the acoustics of the hall meant that voices traveled amazing distances through the network. Cosmo could hear no responses. Cosmo could hear no sponsors whispering 100 yards away. What does the chemist say? Asked Cosmo. About her legs. The chemist was the orphanage name for the boy 3 columns across. He loved to watch medical programs on TV and was the closest thing the no sponsors had to a consultant. Word came back in under a minute. The chemist says spit on your hands, then rub it in. The spit has some kind of salve in it. Don't lick your fingers, though, or the antispirant will make you sicker than those creeper slugs. The sound of boys spinning echoed through the halls. The entire lattice of pipes shook with their efforts. Cosmo followed the chemist's advice, then lay back, letting 100 different conversations wash over him. Sometimes he would join in, or at least listen to one of Ziploc's yarns. But tonight, all he could think about was that moment when freedom would beckon to him, and being ready when it arrived. Cosmo's chance at freedom came the very next day during a routine transfer. 40 no sponsors, Cosmo was among them, had just spent a day at the music company watching proposed TV spots for a computer-generated pop group, followed by 60 kilobyte questionnaires. Which sim singer did you prefer? Which sim performer was cool? Cool? Even the company's computers were out of touch. Kids rarely said cool anymore. Cosmo barely read the questions before checking a box with his digipen. He preferred music made by real people to pixel-generated pop. But nobody complained. A day watching music videos was infinitively more preferable to more chemical tests. Frayne marshals loaded up the no sponsors into a truck after the session. The vehicle must have been 100 years old, with actual rubber tires instead of plastic threads. Cosmo was paired with Ziploc Murphy as a cuff partner. Ziploc was okay, except that he talked too much. This was how he had earned his orphanage name. Once, the Irish boy had talked too much to the wrong person and got the Ziploc from a food baggie superglued over his mouth. It took weeks for the blisters to heal. Not only did Ziploc not learn his lesson, but now he had something else to talk about. "They don't call it super glue for nothing," Ziploc said animatedly, as one of the marshals threaded the cuffs through the restraining ring on the seat. "Medics use that stuff in war zones to seal up the wounded. They pour it straight onto the wounds." Cosmo nodded without much enthusiasm. Ziploc seemed to forget that he had told this story 1,000,000 times, maybe because Cosmo was the only one that pretended to listen when he talked. "They had to use boiling water to get the bag off my face," Ziploc continued. "I didn't feel anything, in case you're worried. One of the marshals shot my entire head full of anesthetic at first. They could have been banging 6-inch nails into my skull and I wouldn't have minded." Cosmo rubbed the flesh beneath the cuffs. All the no sponsors had a ring of red flesh around their wrists, a mark of shame. "You ever try breathing through your nose for an entire day?" I panicked for a few times, I'll admit it. In the cab, the pilot was uplinking the truck to the navigation section of the satellite. But there had been trouble with the satellite lately. Too many add-ons, the TV brain said. Mission 9 was simply getting too heavy for its engines to support such a low orbit. There was even talk about some companies' aerials snapping off a bit and burning. "What's the delay?" shouted Marshal Redwood. The bulky redhead had bad breath today and a worse attitude. Too many beers the night before. His pendulous belly spoke of too many beers almost every night. "If I'm ever late again tonight, Agnes swears she's moving in with her sisters." "It's the satellite," shouted the pilot. "I can't get a line." "Well, make a line, or my boot is going to make a line to your face." Ziploc snickered, just loud enough for Redwood to hear. "You think I'm joking, Francis?" shouted the man, boxing Ziploc on the ear. "You think I wouldn't do it?" "No, sir, you do it, okay? You've got that look in your eyes. It isn't smart to mess with a man that's got that look." Redwood lifted Ziploc's chin until their eyes met. "You know something, Francis? That's the cleverest thing I've ever heard you say. It isn't smart to mess with me because I do whatever I please. The only reason I don't get rid of a dozen of you freaks every day is the paperwork. I hate paperwork."